Hello everyone and welcome to this video where we are going to take a look at how to get started with the iWars competition. Now the goal of every player that plays the competition is to accumulate wealth, and wealth is calculated as the total value of all the resources that a player has. And the value of each individual resource is calculated by multiplying the quantity of the resource by its market value. So how to get these resources? So players start with a fixed number of all the resources, and on top of it, raw materials are distributed by the monitor to all the players that stay online. So it is very important to keep the passive server running so that the monitor knows that you are online and gives you raw materials. Also, the monitor only distributes one raw material to every player. So if you get oil from the monitor at the beginning of the competition, you will only get oil throughout the competition. So now, how to get the other raw materials? So now that can be done either through trading or using civilians, soldiers, buildings and territories to get additional resources. But now, how do we decide which raw materials to collect? So for that, let us first take a look at the economy of the competition. So the economy in iWars comprises 15 resources, which include a currency called rupulars, 9 raw materials such as oil, steel, plastic, copper and others, and 5 finished products like computers, weapons and vehicles. Each of these 5 finished products can be used for carrying specific activities. So which raw materials you would want to collect depends on which finished products you want to manufacture. So if you are interested in building computers, you may invest your efforts in collecting plastic, copper and glass. And on the other hand, if you are interested in weapons, then you can focus your efforts in collecting oil, steel and plastic. But now, how do we decide that which finished product is the most suitable for us? So for that, we need to talk about the different strategies that are involved in the game and the different activities that are in the game. So first, let's start with the different activities that are in the game. So all of the activities from the game are either expensive or time consuming, but not both. So some of the time consuming activities include training civilians and soldiers. So these are highly time consuming activities, and the time required to train civilians and soldiers is dependent on your town hall and post. Another activity which is time consuming is finding territories. So it takes time to find territories, but this time can be drastically reduced by sending more civilians on exploratory missions. And finally, even transporting resources or civilians or soldiers to other players is also time consuming. Now the time depends on the speed of the transport mechanism used. Now next we have expensive activities. So constructing buildings is an expensive activity. It takes thousands of rupulars to construct a building. Now, upgrading territories to house more civilians and soldiers is another expensive activity. And upgrading town hall and post to train civilians and soldiers faster are again expensive activities. So now that we have spoken about these activities, let us talk about the different strategies that can be employed in the competition. So the first strategy that can be employed is that you can be a collector of raw materials. So to be a collector, you could target those raw materials that would help you manufacture a specific finished product, or you could go after any raw materials or resources that have a high market value. So to be a collector, you would need transport mechanisms to get the raw materials from other players to yourself, and you might also need collector buildings that would let you have your own supply of raw materials. Now the next strategy is to become a trader. So now, not every player is going to have ports or airports to operate ships and airplanes. So these players would only be using their vehicles to transport resources. But we know that vehicles are both slower and can carry less resources. So what you can do as a trader is build airports or ports on your territories and transport resources from one player to another while keeping some of the resources you transported between other players as commission. So to be a trader, you would need ports or airports and a fleet of ships or aircrafts. Next, you can also be a provider of manpower. So we have seen earlier that it takes time to train civilians and soldiers. And all of the other activities are also either time consuming or expensive. So not everyone is going to spend their money in upgrading their town halls to train civilians and soldiers faster. But everybody is going to need civilians and soldiers. So what you could do is invest your money into upgrading your town hall and post, which will let you train civilians and soldiers faster. And then you may send your civilians and soldiers to other players in exchange for some resources. Next, you could also be a manufacturer and build factories to synthesize finished products and then sell those finished products to other players. So again, to be a manufacturer, you would need factories on your territories, you would need the raw materials that are required to build the finished products, and you would also need transport mechanisms to sell your goods. Now, another important thing is to make sure that you trust the players that you make deals with. Now, you may make a deal with a player to trade resources. You may send your shipment, but the other player may receive your resources but may choose to not send you anything, resulting in a loss of wealth for you. So you must also ensure that you trade with trusted players so that they also keep their end of the bargain and send you resources. And if that doesn't happen, you must have enough resources to go to war if the other player doesn't honor the trade deals. A good strategy here can be to send resources in small shipments and only send the next shipment once you have received the resources from the other player. Now, as some players find territories and construct buildings, there will definitely be wars, as some players may not want to spend time and money in finding territories and constructing buildings, but they would much rather attack somebody else's territories and take control of the building built on them. So it is important for both attackers and defenders to build weapons and train soldiers so as to protect or attack other territories. And finally, attacking other players without any knowledge about their soldiers and weapons might also be disastrous, because an attack on a player having a lot of soldiers and weapons may result in the attacker suffering losses. So it makes sense for players to gather information about other players before launching actual attacks or before going to wars. But to gather information, you need computers and IT cells. And not every player is going to have the resources to build computers and IT cells. So some players may manufacture computers and build IT cells and gather information about other players and sell that information to other players in exchange for resources. So this is how you can plan your strategies in the iWars competition. And now we will also take a look at a small demo covering some of the commands that can help you get started. So in this demo, we have two players. We have player Rishi and we have player Barry. So let us go ahead and first log both of the players into the competition. Okay, so once the players are logged in, the first step that we need to do is take a look at our resources. So to do that, we'll go to the Assets menu and we'll issue the player status command. So if we see here, player Barry has 50 units of all of the resources. So this is the amount of resources that player Barry begins with. Now, additional resources will be awarded to every player if the players stay online. So the monitor will distribute raw materials to the players if they stay online. So now while we are waiting for raw materials from the monitor, let us take a look at our civilian information. So for that, we issue the civilian info command. And this shows us that we have a maximum capacity of 50 civilians, out of which 20 have already been trained and provided to us. All of these 20 civilians are currently idle and not doing anything. So now, because we know that training civilians takes time, we'll go ahead and start training some civilians. So for that, we'll first take a look at our town hall. So now the town hall info tells us that we have a capacity of 50 civilians and a training speed of 4. So this means that this town hall can train one civilian every 4 minutes. We also have the ability to upgrade this town hall by spending 20 rupulars. And if we upgrade the town hall, the new capacity is going to be 100 and the new speed is going to be 3. Now one thing to remember here is that these times, the training time is so low or the upgrade cost is so low for the purpose of this demo. In an actual competitions, these values will be much higher. Okay, so now since we have 50 rupulars, we can go ahead and spend 20 of those rupulars to upgrade our town hall and make it faster. So to do that, we issue the upgrade town hall command. Once that is done, we can check our town hall info again and we can see that the capacity has increased and the speed has also gone down. So now we can go ahead and train some civilians. So to do that, we issue the train civilians command. And we'll specify that we want to train 15 civilians. Okay, so the monitor tells us that 15 civilians will be trained in 45 minutes. Okay, so once that is done, let us take a look at our player status once again. So here we can see that the quantity of steel that we have is increasing. So this means we are receiving steel from the monitor. So similarly, let's go back to player Rishi and see what player Rishi is receiving from the monitor. So we'll go to the assets menu and check the player status. So player Rishi is receiving glass from the monitor. Okay, so now how do we send resources from player Rishi to player Barry? So first, we need to know which are the players that are connected to the competition. So to do that, we go to the authentication menu and issue the get game idents command. So this tells us the number of players that are connected to the competition. So now we can see here that there are 2 players, Rishi and Barry. So now, before sending resources, let's also see what the distance is between us and player Barry. So for that, we go to the territory menu and issue the view distance command. Here we'll have to specify the name of the player, which is Barry. And the monitor tells us that it takes our vehicles 2 minutes to reach Barry, ships 5 minutes, and airplanes 1 minute. Now because we don't have a port or an airport, we'll have to use our vehicles. So to send resources, we'll go back to the assets menu and we'll issue the send raw materials command. So here the player name is going to be Barry. The mode is going to be vehicles. And let us try to send 25 units of coal to player Barry. So once we do that, the monitor notifies us that 3 vehicles are on their way to Barry carrying 25 units of coal. Now if we take a look at our player status, we can see that 25 units of our coal are in transit and 3 of our vehicles are also in transit. So now we only have 47 available vehicles to us. Okay, so now if we go back to player Barry and if we check the player status, we can see that our coal is still 50 and that is because the shipment of coal will take 2 minutes to arrive to us. So now while we are awaiting the shipment, let us go to our territory menu and let us see if we have any territories. So to do that, we can issue the territory status command. Now the monitor tells us that no territories have been explored and we can explore a maximum of 10 territories. So to do that, we'll have to issue the explore territory command and here we'll have to specify the number of civilians we wish to send. So let us send 5 civilians on exploratory mission. So once that is done, the monitor tells us that the estimated time is 1 minute, which means we are expected to find a territory in 1 minute. So let us go back to our assets and let us take a look at our civilian info. So here we can see that now we have 21 trained civilians. So one of the civilians has finished their training and out of the 21 civilians, only 16 are idle. So now we can only use 16 civilians. We cannot use the 5 civilians that are working because they have gone to find a territory for us. So while we are awaiting a shipment from player Rishi and also we are awaiting the discovery of the territory, let us go ahead and take a look at our soldier info. So for that, we issue the soldier info command and here again we can see that we have 20 trained soldiers and all of the 20 soldiers are ready to be deployed. Also, similar to town hall info, we can even check the post info, which will tell us some information about our post. Okay, and now we are also receiving notifications. So we have found one territory and even the shipment has arrived. Okay, so now if we check our player status, we can see that we have 75 units of coal. Also, if we take a look at our civilian info, we can see that the civilians are also back from working into idle because they came back after discovering a territory. If we go back to player Rishi also gets a notification saying that the shipment was delivered. And if we take a look at the player status here, we can see that the coal is no longer in transit, but the vehicles are still in transit. And the reason for that is that the vehicles are now on their way back. So it will take 2 more minutes for the vehicles to be available. Okay, so now going back to player Barry, let us go to our territory menu. And if we check the territory status now, we can see that we have a territory 1 which is empty. So 1 is the ID of the territory and empty is the status of the territory. So since we have an empty territory, we can go ahead and now build a building on the territory. So to do that, we'll issue the build command. The ID of the territory is going to be 1 and the name of the building can be anything that we want to build. So now let us try to build a collector building for oil. So to do that, we'll issue the build command with territory ID 1 and building name as collector oil. And once that is done, the monitor tells us that the building was built. Now the monitor actually consumed some of our resources to build this building. Again, for the purpose of this demo, the number was very little, so that is the reason the building was constructed. But if in the actual competition, if you do not have enough resources, then the building won't be constructed. Okay, so now that we have the building, it also makes sense for us to deploy some civilians to work in the building so that they can start collecting oil. So to do that, we'll issue the deploy civilians command. Here again, we'll have to specify the ID of the territory, which is 1, and number of civilians. So let's deploy 10 civilians to work in the territory. So once we do that, the monitor notifies us saying that the civilians were deployed. We can also take a look at the detailed information about the territory by issuing the territory info command. So here we'll have to specify the ID of the territory, which is 1. And now we can see that territory ID 1 has a collector oil building built on it. There are 10 civilians working, no soldiers are deployed, and the status is occupied. So again, if we go back to our assets and if we check the civilian information, we can see that we now have 22 trained civilians, out of which 12 are idle and 10 are working. So now we can only use 12 of these civilians and not the 10 ones who are working in the building. So if we wish to utilize more civilians for some other activity, we can always call the civilians back from the territory. So to do that, we'll go back to the territory menu and we'll issue the callback civilians command. So now the ID of the territory is going to be 1 and the number is going to be, say, 5. So we'll call back 5 civilians from the territory. So if we go back to our assets and if we check the civilian information again, we can see that now we have 17 civilians who are idle and only 5 who are working. Also, if we check the player status, we can see that the quantity of oil has not increased, but it will increase because it takes time for civilians to actually start collecting raw materials. Okay, also going back to player Rishi's vehicles are back from Bali. So now if we take a look at the player status, we can see that all 50 of our vehicles are now available. Okay, so now what if player Rishi wishes to attack player Barry? So to do that, we'll have to go to the war menu and issue the attack command. So here we'll have to specify the name of the player, which is Barry, the ID of the territory. Okay, so now we know what the ID of Barry's territory is, but player Rishi in an actual competition will have to find this information out by using IT cells or by gathering this information from somewhere so that player Rishi knows which territory can be attacked. because player Barry might have many territories. So player Rishi will have to find out which territory has the least number of soldiers deployed or the least number of weapons deployed and then attack that territory. So then the ID of the territory to attack can be provided here, and player Rishi also has to decide how many soldiers and weapons to send for the actual attack. So now for the purpose of this demo, let's attack with 10 soldiers and 10 weapons. Again, the mode of transport is going to be vehicles because we don't have a port or an airport. Okay, so once we issue this command, we get a notification from the monitor saying that the army was sent. And 8 vehicles are on their way carrying 10 soldiers and 10 weapons. So now if we go back to our assets and if we take a look at the player status, we can see that only 42 vehicles are now available and 8 are in transit. And similarly, only 40 weapons are available and only 10 are in transit. And 10 are in transit because we have sent them on the war, for the war. Similarly, if we take a look at the soldier information, we can see that out of the 20 trained soldiers, only 10 are available and 10 are in transit. So we know that the actual war will only start after 2 minutes because that is how long it takes for the soldiers and weapons to reach player Barry. Okay, so going back to player Barry, we can check the player status once again and we can see that the quantity of oil that we have is increasing. And that is because our civilians are actually collecting the oil for us. So we can go back to the territory. We can check the territory information once again. And we can see that our civilians are working in the building on our territory. Okay, so now while we are waiting for Rishi's army to attack Barry, let us also take a look at the soldier info once again. Let us take a look at the post info. So the capacity of the post is 50, the speed is 4. Again, even the post can be upgraded by spending 20 rupulars, which will make the new capacity 100 and the new speed as 3. We can even upgrade the post since we have rupulars to train soldiers faster. Also, we won't deploy any of our soldiers or weapons on our territories because if we have our defense mechanism set up, then our soldiers will engage in a battle with player Rishi's soldiers, and once the battles are done, only then one of the players will win the war. But if we don't have any soldiers or weapons on our territory, player Rishi will win the war easily, and that is what we want to demonstrate in this demo. So now the army has arrived. So player Barry receives a notification from the monitor saying that the territory 1 is attacked by Rishi. So if we go to our territories and if we check territory status, okay, so the war has still not started. Now if we check the territory status once again, we can see that territory 1 is lost. So we have lost the territory and relinquished its control to player Rishi. So if we take a look at the territory info once again for territory 1, we can see that there is no building built on it, no civilians working, no soldiers deployed because the civilians were captured as prisoners by player Rishi. So if we go back to our assets and if we check the civilian info, we can see that we have only 19 trained civilians and all of the 19 are idle. So we should have had 24 trained civilians and 5 of them should have been working, but they were unfortunately captured by player Rishi as prisoners. Also, the amount of oil that we have gathered is 59 and now we are no longer going to gather any more oil because we have lost the collector oil building. But if we go back to player Rishi, yes, so player Rishi also receives this notification saying that the war was begun with Barry. And if we check the player status now, we can see that the vehicles are back, the weapons are back because there were no soldiers deployed by player Barry. So we did not incur any loss in the war. All of our weapons are still intact. All of our vehicles are still intact. And if we go to the territory menu, player Rishi had not discovered any territories. But if we check the territory status now, Player Rishi also has one territory and its status is acquired because it was acquired through a war. And the territory ID for this territory for Rishi is also 1. So now if we check the territory information for this territory, so we already have territory ID 1 with a collector oil building built on it. So player Barry spent some resources to build this building, but player Rishi got it for free just by attacking player Barry's territory. Also, now if player Rishi wants to utilize their civilians to work in the building, player Rishi can start collecting oil on the acquired territory. So to do that, again, player Rishi has to issue the deploy civilians command. The territory ID is 1 and the number is 5. And once that happens, player Rishi will start gathering oil on their territory, which was acquired through a war. Again, if we go to the war menu, and if we issue the prisoner info command, we can see here that prisoners held are 5. So these are the civilians that were captured as prisoners from player Barry's territory. Also, if we go to assets and if we check civilian information, so player Rishi has now 25 trained civilians. But out of those trained civilians, only 15 are idle and 5 are working. The rest of the 5 civilians are actually prisoners that were captured from player Barry. So now player Rishi has to decide what to do with those prisoners, because now even if player Rishi has a capacity of training 50 civilians, he can effectively only have 45 civilians, because the 5 civilian spot in the town hall is consumed by the prisoners. So player Rishi will then have to take the difficult decision of dealing with those prisoners. Yes, so if we check the player status again, player Rishi hasn't started gathering any oil yet, but it will gradually start getting accumulated once the civilians start gathering oil. So we can wait for another minute or so till oil starts gathering on player Rishi's territory, and then we can end this video. So till that happens, we can also take a look at some of the espionage commands. So to actually issue these commands, you require an IT cell. But once you have the IT cell, what are the things that you can find about other players? So you can issue the territory status crack. So here you will have to commit some computers. Yes, so player Rishi has 50 computers. Player Rishi is wanting to attack player Barry. So player Rishi can use say 5 computers to crack the territory status for player Barry. So territory status crack command will let player Rishi find out territory status information about player Barry. Similarly, territory info crack command will let player Rishi find out territory info about some specific territory of player Barry. And similarly, there are informations to crack the soldier info, the civilian info, and the player status for other players. Okay, so now let's go back to our assets. And if we check player status, we can see that oil is now 52. So player Rishi has now started collecting oil using the collector building that was actually built by player Barry. Okay, so this is where we'll end our demo. And once again, a complete list of all of these commands is provided in the user manual. Today we saw a few of these commands. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Thank you.